In Cincinnati's abandoned subway tunnels, where no one has worked for a century, they found fresh time card punches from yesterday, and every worker's name was someone already dead. From the depths of my collection, the Nightmare Maestro brings you a tale that will make you question every maintenance hole you pass, every subway rumble beneath your feet. After all, some shifts never end, and the crew is always hiring. Emma's phone buzzed with Ryan's message at 2:47 a.m., the same time she usually jolted awake, heart racing from memories of that night in the ambulance. Her brother's text glowed in the darkness. Found something in the old subway tunnels. Need you with me on this one. 3 years of silence between them, broken by 12 words that made her hands tremble. Not from the familiar panic that had haunted her since failing to save that young girl, but from something deeper, a primal warning humming in her bones. She traced the words on her screen, remembering the last time Ryan had said he found something. They were kids then, exploring abandoned houses in their neighborhood. His discoveries always led to trouble, like the time he broke his arm falling through rotted floorboards. But he'd also been the one who pulled her back when curiosity nearly led her off a crumbling ledge. The next message came with a photo, Ryan's face half illuminated by a flashlight, standing before an ornate archway covered in decades of grime. Behind him, darkness stretched endlessly. Remember how we used to chase mysteries? Time to face one together, sis. Tomorrow night, I'll send coordinates. Emma's EMT training screamed about the dangers. Unstable structures, toxic air, the thousand ways things could go wrong in the forgotten spaces beneath the city. But as she stared at her brother's familiar crooked smile, another image flashed. Monitors flatlining, small hands growing cold, her own voice breaking as she called time of death. Maybe this was what her therapist meant about confronting fears, about finding her way back to who she used to be. Her fingers hovered over the phone. In the darkness of her apartment, a distant mechanical groan echoed through the pipes, or perhaps from somewhere deeper, as if the city itself was shifting in its sleep. 3 years of running from everything, including her brother. 3 years of night shifts and panic attacks and questioning every decision. The reply came almost automatically. What time? As soon as she hit send, the pipes fell silent. In their place, a faint, rhythmic tapping began, like metal on metal, drifting up through the floors. Probably just the heating system, she told herself. But for a moment, it sounded almost like someone hammering, deep underground, counting down the hours until tomorrow night. The coordinates led Emma to a graffiti-covered alley in Cincinnati's West End, where Ryan's limping silhouette emerged from the shadows. His usual confident stride now faltered, though he tried to mask it with a swagger. The neon signs from a nearby convenience store cast alternating red and blue shadows across his face, reminding Emma of ambulance lights. Ryan pulled out his phone, thumbing through his social media metrics. My urban exploration channel's bleeding subscribers, he muttered, his voice tight with an unfamiliar desperation. But this is going to change everything. He showed her footage of his previous visit. Eerily preserved subway platforms, vintage advertisements still clinging to tiled walls, and something that made Emma's breath catch. A perfectly preserved worker's lunch pail, sitting in the middle of the tracks, untouched by time. The manhole cover they needed to access lay hidden beneath a dumpster. As Ryan struggled to move it with his injured leg, Emma noticed fresh scratches in the metal, not the expected wear of decades, but sharp, recent marks scoring the surface in deliberate patterns. She traced them with her fingertips, finding they formed words, below stays below. A gust of wind carried the scent of wet stone and something metallic, like old pennies, from the exposed tunnel entrance. Emma's EMT instincts fired warning signals. That metallic smell reminded her too much of blood. Ryan, those scratches, she began, but he was already lowering himself down the rusty ladder, his camera gear clanking against the rungs. Did you know they just stopped construction one day? Ryan's voice echoed up from below. February 1925. Hundreds of workers showed up to find the site abandoned. No warning, no explanation. They left everything behind, tools, equipment, even personal belongings. He didn't mention what Emma had already researched: the rumors of workers who had gone missing in the months before, or the mysterious cave-ins that engineers could never explain. The ladder creaked under Emma's weight. Each rung felt wrong against her palms, too smooth in spots where decades of rust should have roughened the metal. At the bottom, their flashlight beams caught fragments of the station's former grandeur: Art Deco archways, elaborate tile work, brass fixtures turned green with age. But it was the silence that struck Emma hardest, not the dead quiet of abandoned places, but an expectant hush, like an audience holding its breath before a performance. Ryan switched on his camera, its small red recording light piercing the darkness. "Let's make history, sis," he whispered, but his voice wavered. Behind him, in the instant before he turned away, Emma's light swept across more scratched writing on the wall. "They're still working." Their footsteps echoed oddly in the tunnel, not just bouncing off the curved walls, but returning with subtle variations, as if someone was matching their pace just a fraction out of sync. Ryan's camera light swept across construction equipment frozen in time: wheelbarrows full of century-old concrete, pickaxes mid-swing against the walls, rope coiled with impossible neatness. The lunch pail from Ryan's video sat exactly where he'd found it, though Emma could have sworn the handle had been pointing the other direction in the footage. Inside, a sandwich remained mysteriously preserved, the bread still soft. A newspaper wrapped around it bore the date: February 12, 1925, the day before the project's abandonment. A rhythmic clang reverberated through the darkness ahead, like a sledgehammer striking steel. Ryan's face lit up behind his camera. "That's it. That's the sound I've been hearing down here." He pressed forward, but Emma grabbed his arm. The sound wasn't coming from ahead anymore. It echoed from behind them, then the left, then somewhere above. The tunnels were playing acoustic tricks, or... "Listen," Emma whispered. Between the metallic impacts, other sounds emerged: bootsteps on gravel, murmured conversations just below comprehension, the squeal of rusty cartwheels. The ambient noise of construction work, bleeding through decades of silence. Ryan's camera suddenly beeped, its battery dying despite being fully charged minutes ago. In the moment of darkness before Emma raised her light, something moved in the shadows: a figure passing through a doorway, the swish of canvas workwear, the glint of a metal helmet. When her beam found the spot, only empty air remained. The siblings pressed on, Ryan masking his fear with commentary for his phantom audience, Emma fighting the growing certainty that the tunnel behind them no longer matched her memory. The tracks bent at impossible angles, doorways appeared in previously solid walls, and everywhere, tools lay scattered as if dropped mid-use, their handles worn smooth by hands that had never stopped working. A distant voice called out, "Time to clock in," followed by answering shouts that grew steadily closer. The air temperature plummeted. Emma's light caught Ryan's face, now pale with recognition. "We need to go," he said, all pretense of bravado gone. "I've seen what comes next, in my dreams, every night since I first found this place." But as they turned back, their beams illuminated a scene that stopped them cold. Dozens of lanterns hung in a perfect circle, their flames burning steady despite the dust of ages on their glass. In the center lay Ryan's camera from his previous visit, the one he'd told Emma he'd lost up on the street. Its screen glowed to life unprompted, playing footage neither of them had shot. Two figures entering the tunnel, captured from behind, limping and whole. Emma yanked the camera's battery out, but the screen continued playing, showing moments from their childhood. Emma and Ryan exploring abandoned houses, Ryan pulling her back from that crumbling ledge, both of them promising to always protect each other. The footage degraded into static, then resolved to show something else. Security camera footage dated February 13, 1925, capturing workers descending into the tunnel for a shift that history said never happened. "It's not real," Ryan insisted, his voice cracking. "Gas leak has to be making us hallucinate." But Emma's EMT training told her otherwise. Their breathing was normal, their pupils weren't dilated, and hallucinations didn't leave footprints in the dust. Footprints that now surrounded them in a perfect circle, all pointing inward. The hammering grew louder, accompanied by the screech of metal on metal. A train whistle shrieked from the darkness, impossible, given that no train had ever run these lines. The sound Dopplered past them and faded, leaving behind the distinct odor of coal smoke and something else, something Emma had smelled before. The same stench that had filled her ambulance the night she lost that young patient, the copper-sweet reek of arterial blood. Ryan's leg buckled, forcing them to stop. In the beam of Emma's light, his limp seemed worse, his leg bent at a subtly wrong angle. "I should tell you," he gasped, "about my accident. I wasn't urban exploring. I was down. Found something. A room full of time card machines, still punching, marking attendance for workers who never left. One of them had my name." A distant dinner whistle echoed through the tunnels. Ryan's watch, an antique timepiece inherited from their father, chimed in response. The hands spun backward, ticking away the decades until they settled on 4:47 p.m., February 13, 1925, the exact time stamped on the security footage they'd just seen. "We have to get out," Emma insisted, but Ryan's eyes had fixed on something behind her. She turned to find the tunnel transformed. Gone were the signs of decay and abandonment. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, electric lights buzzed to life, and the air filled with the sounds and smells of active construction. In the sudden brightness, she saw what they'd been missing. Hundreds of shadows cast on the walls, but no bodies to cast. Through the ghostly scene, a foreman's voice rang out. "New shift starting. Get those support beams in before the cave." The words struck Emma with horrible clarity. They weren't witnessing the past. They were hearing a warning about what was about to happen. Again and again and again. The tunnel convulsed. Concrete rippled like water, tracks twisted like serpents, and the walls breathed, actually breathed, expanding and contracting with the rhythmic pounding of phantom hammers. Emma grabbed Ryan's arm to run, but her hand passed through him, as if he were made of smoke. Her brother's form flickered like bad reception, alternating between his present self and a figure in canvas workwear, a dented helmet shadowing his eyes. "I never made it out." Ryan's voice echoed from multiple directions, his mouth no longer moving with the words. "That accident I told you about? Look." He held up his phone, showing his social media feed. Every photo, every video he'd posted since his accident showed the same thing once Emma looked closely enough. He cast no reflection in mirrors, left no footprints in snow, appeared slightly transparent in direct sunlight. The ground shuddered, support beams groaned. Through gaps in the cracking ceiling, Emma glimpsed impossible things, layers of time stacked like geological strata, each level showing the tunnel in different eras. In one, workers fled from a rolling cloud of dust and debris. In another, search parties combed through rubble. In the deepest layer, shadows worked endlessly, their picks and shovels striking in perfect synchronization with her racing heart. A time card machine materialized beside them, its ancient mechanism clacking to life. A yellowed card emerged, bearing Emma's name in rust-colored ink. The clock face spun wildly before stopping at 4:47 p.m., the exact time she'd pronounced that young girl dead in her ambulance. Not a coincidence, never a coincidence. "They've been waiting for you." Ryan's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. For someone who understands what it means to fail to save a life. Someone who knows the weight of being too late. His form stabilized, but now wore the antique workwear completely. His face streaked with coal dust and something dark. "I thought I could warn you, but that's not how it works down here. We don't warn. The hammering reached a deafening crescendo. Skeletal hands burst from the walls, still clutching tools, still trying to brace supports that had failed a century ago. The air filled with voices, calling out times of death. Not just Emma's patient, but hundreds of others. Every life lost because help arrived too late. Every soul that might have been saved if someone had just been there soon. Emma ran, but the tunnel corkscrewed impossibly, always leading back to the time card machine. Behind her, Ryan's voice joined the chorus of the damned. Time to clock in, sis. Your shift is just beginning. The card waited like a death warrant, her name written in what she now recognized as dried blood. Emma's training took over, assess the situation, identify exits, maintain calm, but every emergency protocol shattered against the impossible geometry of the tunnels. Her flashlight beam caught glimpses of exits that shouldn't exist, doorways opening onto construction sites decades apart, windows looking into parallel tunnels where other versions of herself fled from other versions of Ryan, each one wearing progressively older work clothes, each one moving with that same unnatural limp. The time card machine followed, materializing in every shadow, its mechanical heartbeat matching the rhythm of phantom hammers. Each time it appeared, new names filled its ledger, her ambulance partners, her patients, every person she'd failed to save. The dates stretched backward through time, countless souls drafted into this underground purgatory of endless work and eternal regret. A familiar sound cut through the cacophony, the heart monitor's flatline tone from that fatal night in the ambulance. Emma spun toward it and found herself face to face with the young girl she'd lost, but wrong, aged into a construction worker, hard hat askew, eyes filled with the same accusation Emma saw in the mirror every morning. "You could have been faster," the figure said in Ryan's voice. "Could have saved us all." The walls wept rust-colored water. Tool marks in the stone formed words in a dozen languages, all reading the same. "Below stays below." The tunnel floor tilted, sending Emma sliding toward a pit that opened like a throat. Her flashlight illuminated its depths, an impossible construction site extending infinitely downward, where thousands of figures worked in synchronized torment, their movements creating the percussion of picks and hammers that had lured them. Ryan appeared at the pit's edge, his form now fully transformed into something ancient and terrible. The brother who had once pulled her back from a deadly fall now reached out with hands stained by decades of phantom labor. "There's peace in it, Emma. Peace in accepting failure, in joining those who understand." His smile stretched too wide, teeth gleaming like exposed rebar. "We'll work together again, like we promised." Emma scrambled back, but decades of ghostly footsteps had worn the concrete smooth as glass. Her light caught movement in the pit, workers looking up, their faces familiar, every patient she'd lost, every person who died under her care, all of them laboring to expand this nightmare maze, to dig deeper into whatever hell lay beneath Cincinnati street. The time card machine appeared one final time, her card waiting like a judge's verdict. Through its punched holes, Emma saw the truth. This wasn't just a haunted, it was a recruitment center for an eternal construction crew, built from the souls of those who carried the weight of others' deaths. Who better to dig forever through the dark than those already crushed by guilt? The pit's edge crumbled. Emma fell, but instead of dropping into the abyss, she crashed through layers of reality like panes of glass. Each fragment showed a different version of the tunnel's history: the original construction, the mysterious abandonment, decades of urban explorers vanishing without trace. She saw Ryan's first visit, watched him stumble upon a time card machine that knew his name, watched him punch in, not understanding what it meant, watched him try to save others by bringing them below, compelled by the same guilt that drove the eternal worker. She hit bottom, or what passed for bottom, in this place where direction had lost meaning. Her flashlight sputtered, each strobe revealing new horrors, walls made of fused tools and bones, tracks that wrapped around themselves in Mobius loops, and everywhere the work, their forms flickering between flesh and shadow as they expanded this labyrinth of guilt and regret. The young girl from the ambulance appeared again, but the accusation in her eyes had changed to something worse: understanding. "Everyone fails," she said, her voice echoing with the wisdom of the eternal crew. "Parents, siblings, patients. The lucky ones never know the cost. But you're qualified for the work. You understand the weight." The time card machine manifested one last time, her card waiting in its mind. Emma saw her options with horrible clarity. Punch in and join the crew, accept an eternity of mindless labor as penance for her failures, or face the responsibility of her choices. Remember that sometimes, despite every effort, people die. That guilt was the price of caring, not a sin requiring endless punishment. Ryan's shape loomed over her, no longer even pretending to be her brother. "Don't fight it," the thing wearing his face said. "Clock in, accept your place. The work never ends, but the guilt finally stops." Around them, the workers paused their eternal labors, tools raised, waiting to welcome another member to their damnation. Emma's hand moved toward the machine, drawn by the siren song of absolution through eternal labor. But at the last moment, she grabbed the card and tore it in half. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. Cracks appeared in the tunnel's reality, light bleeding through from the world above. The workers screamed, not in anger, but in recognition of a truth they'd forgotten. Guilt was meant to be carried, not buried. She fell upward, through the cracks, past the layers of time, leaving Ryan and his crew to their chosen penance. Emma erupted from the manhole into dawn's gray light, gasping as reality reasserted itself. But something had followed her, not a ghost or a monster, but understanding. Below the city, the hammers still rang, counting out the rhythm of eternal shifts. They would always ring, calling to those who carried guilt's weight. But now she knew the choice to punch in, to surrender to endless labor in the dark, was just another way to fail those who needed her above. If tonight's tale has left you double-checking the ground beneath your feet, remember, some of the deepest horrors lie not in abandoned tunnels, but in the weight of guilt we carry. Share your own urban exploration close calls in the comments below, or tell us about times when you felt something watching you in places that should have been empty. Don't forget to subscribe to the Nightmare Maestro and ring that bell to ensure you never miss a haunting tale. After all, there are countless more stories waiting in the dark places beneath our city. Until next time, watch your step, and remember, not every trapped soul below is trying to escape. Some are waiting for company,